That's an important point of technical requirements, because aside from understanding your own brand and your own values and then your audience, there are some very practical things that you need to know about your brand. You know, where are you going to be using it? And, you know, is it in print or is it online? If you're on social media, you know, you need to think about how your icon perhaps will work in, you know, in a sort of square or a circular avatar. And then, yeah, think about the places you're going to be using a brand. You know, something people or we think about a lot is how a logo works at different sizes and for different uses. And sometimes you need several versions of a logo to work in, you know, a very small place or somewhere where you've got more space. So understanding those technical requirements, if you like, are really important.
It makes it much easier. We've been asked to run a signature course for the Association for Coaching, and so they needed things in a particular format. And I found myself having to send our logo in a circular format, which is something that we don't normally tend to use. And it was so easy because it was there, because it was in the library, it was in the suite of stuff that you'd already provided to us, and it was so easy. It made my life so much easier, both of our lives so much easier. Before we move into anything too technical, I just want to reflect on one thing which you said, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and then Simon echoed it as well, which is almost like a kind of, it's like you're a relationship counsellor. You know, you come in and you make people have to work, and you know, Simon and I luckily get on incredibly well, and also from the get-go we've had very healthy conversations which are very honest about our needs and our wants and our wishes and how we work, and you know, we've been very honest with each other. But you know, that was an example of where one might have made the assumption that the other person was very much singing from the same hymn sheet, and then lo and behold, we had quite different tastes. And being able to come together and talk about what was important for us about those things, and therefore to air our differences or air the nuances of our opinion at that early stage of forming a business was so useful. I don't know if we pay it as much credit as perhaps we should in terms of how good our relationship is now. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of pay tribute to the sort of counselling that you can do, I guess, along the way. I'm sure, whether it's, as you say, somebody who, you know, co-worker, co-founders, or if somebody's looking to transition from one state of affairs to another, and to hold their hand in that emotional journey and get them to really drill down on what it is they stood for, how people see them and what they want to be seen as moving forward is quite an emotional journey. So I just wanted to say that at this point.
Yeah, I think, I mean, communication is key always in all areas of life, but it's very key certainly for what we do. And you know, two people with a slightly different views on something is quite common, but I often get briefs where one individual has opposing views in the same brief, so it's something I'm quite used to dealing with. But you know, part of my job is not just putting you know, digital pen to paper. It's about helping someone through the brief process and building a brief, because a lot of people haven't done a design brief before, and that sort of workshop process and helping someone understand a bit who they are and how they want to be perceived is part of my job. So I very much see it as part of the design process. So if someone's thinking, oh, I don't know what I stand for, or I don't know, you know, I've sort of designed exercises and run workshops with my clients to help them get clearer on how they want to be perceived, or get clearer on, you know, their sort of visual qualities or their values. So it's great when they've already done thinking about that. It makes it quicker and easier, but it's also something we sort of do to try and help people, because not everyone comes with a fully formed idea. And I'm fine with that, you know. Yeah, it's part of the process to get clear on what you need and what you want to present yourself as.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to share a little something sort of from the I guess customer side of things. So as an agency, we don't do in-house design. We've always used external designers, and we have, which we call, let's politely say, a range of designers. Some designers we can take a thing to, so it's like, I need you to make this, and it's like, that is the thing I need you to make. And if you ask them to, can you try and like give us something that's, and we go through that process you've just described of trying to articulate it, it just their strength is not there. and you just end up with 5 very similar variations of the first idea they had. Whereas designers like Martine are very good at, taking someone's description of how they want someone to feel and coming up with something that you wouldn't have thought of even if you'd sat down for years on end and scribbled out all of your ideas. There's just a creative spark in the work Martine does that is different to other designers. So I think one of the things I'm trying to say there is also, thank you Martine, but also is that you shouldn't necessarily think that just because you've seen a designer do something well for one person means it's going to work for you. There's definitely a vibe there that you have to get on, and they have to be on that same wavelength as you, because we knew early on that we needed someone who was going to be able to turn this into something that we couldn't have come up with ourselves, because otherwise we would just, I think, I'm speaking a little bit for Francis here, I feel like we would have just tried to shape it, whereas what we did is we gave you a brief and then complete freedom to do something. Because I think one of the things I've learned over the years is if you try and do a bit of the work up front, I find it really clouds and impacts the design, whereas it's better just to go, I want people to feel like this when they look at it, and that's the name. Have you got any ideas? And let's let the creativity come.
I have to say that's the most exciting brief for me is one where you get creative freedom, and you do get the full range from I've done a sketch of what I want my logo to look like, can you make it look nice, to here's the name, here's what we stand for, go create. And obviously I love that creative freedom, and I find it really exciting being at the start of someone's journey and being a very small part, but being a part of their success and how they present themselves, and going on that journey with someone to right at the start. When people start a new venture, they're so excited and enthusiastic about what they're doing, and often they have loads of ideas, and I'm all for taking the ideas. If you have a visual idea or something that you love, I always like people to share it, because it's also very difficult to design for someone who says I'll know what I like when I see it, or that's sort of a red flag, or I've got some ideas but I'm not going to tell you what they are. I just like, if you have ideas, it's good to see, like, for example, I know you guys listed some websites that you thought worked well, and that was useful to get on the same wavelength as you, but then after that I had sort of creative freedom to come back with some ideas, and that was really nice. I think if you don't give that creative freedom, you kind of not using the full value of the designer. If you're cutting down the options right from the start, the designer becomes more of an art worker than someone who can bring creative value for you.
Also, I think it kind of, I'm thinking back to that time in the pub, Simon, where apart from anything else, we were actually able to meet up in real life, which was quite nice. But when we got our brand guidelines, which we'll come to in a minute, and just having them there, having printed them out, and like being able to look and feel them in our hands, look at them, feel them in our hands, and say, this is it, this is real, like this thing that we are birthing is actually happening in front of our eyes. And that comes from the creative freedom that you had, where you were giving the gift to us of this thing that we had just been like twinkles in our mind, and then there it was, you were giving that to us. It was like the mark of actual, almost the birth bit. It was so exciting.
We've arrived, we've got a brand,
we've got it.
I think that's it, because it was like before it was just we had a domain name and that was
an idea
and an idea, and then all of a sudden it's like, hang on, now we can put colours, we can put fonts, we can do all this stuff. But I think now is the time for Martine to reveal the brand guidelines. I think this would be a great time to go through them, because essentially that point we were at, so we said yes to the brand, and then it's like, right, now what do I do? How do I go about making a website? Where do I put my logo? How big is it? What font do I use? What colours are they? This is what brand guidelines give you. So Martine, do you want to sort of show us through these brand guides, and then we can sort of talk around what these sort of how, if you talk through them, I can sort of reflect a bit on where we use them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
So I expect a lot of people on here will recognise parts of it, because you've been using it, through your social media and other channels. But one of the key things, I guess I should talk about the key component parts to this brand guidelines, which is quite brief, but it's also quite flexible, and I think that's important. So you're giving consistency, but also flexibility, because you don't want to paint yourself into a box. But the key things that we cover in this are the logo and how to use it, fonts and color palette. And with this brand, we ended up developing a set of shapes. So someone's just said, I need to be painted into a box. Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
Exactly. I think it's probably worth saying that we actually did ask Martine essentially for almost a brand toolkit. So it was all of the elements of the brand that we could then go away and layer up. As I said earlier, I'm sort of fairly au fait with brand assembly, if you will, of if I've got the right tools to work with, I can put stuff together that looks on brand, as you would say. We didn't need kind of an Instagram post designing a story post.
Yes.
We didn't need all of those things that sometimes you can get from a designer.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah. I mean, sometimes we do create things like social media post templates or, that kind of thing. So I guess you can kind of brief your designer on based on your own experience of dealing with this kind of stuff, how much flexibility you want and how much you just want to know exactly how something should look.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So this is sort of an introduction to the logo, really. And on its own, it's very simple and quite bold. But when we had our face-to-face chat, and I met Frances for the first time, and you told me the name, and one of the first things I start doing is sort of writing it down in different form, in different sort of letter forms. And one of the things I think I said to you is like, well, this is a bit of a gift. All of the words have got the same amount of letters, and that makes a very nice grid, and is also very helpful for a logo that works well on social in terms of creating a very square shape. So so that was quite nice. Often with logos you get a little gift in terms of the letters, the letter forms, and sometimes there's something interesting you can do with those.
We and also because so my background is that I did graphic design before I then did cultural theory and sociology and then art history. So my first foray into sort of having done a bit of art at school and something a bit more serious was understanding the kind of connotations and denotations of kind of word and image and colour and shape. And what I was so excited about at this point was that what you had worked out was this kind of matrix of all the letters that, what it communicated was how it was kind of very tidy, but within the letters there was this invitation to see, everybody wants to kind of see if they can see words within that and patterns, and that's kind of what we invite people to have a relationship with marketing like. I'm not being very articulate, but I loved that what you had discovered immediately resonated with me as a kind of metaphorical symbol of what it is that we're trying to get people to play with. So yeah, I was really pleased at that point.
I think what was also quite nice for me, because you've picked 3 words that you're essentially saying this is how you want your audience to feel. So that gave us a bit more freedom in terms of perhaps iconography and colour to be more simple about it, because we didn't need to communicate quite so much in, we don't need to have a very overt descriptive icon to go with it. So we were able with the colour to really reflect the boldness and the braveness in colour, and be really bold with colour. And I remember showing you some colours and you were like, can we turn it up some more? And that was really fun, because sometimes people are quite conservative or worried about being too bold, but we turned it right up to 11 on the colour, and I think that's great.
Yeah, that was my first reaction on the first colour palette. Was like, this is the right direction, but I want them to literally jump out of the screen at me. I want this to feel like I need sunglasses to look at. That was
I think we achieved that. Yeah,
that's my measure. I was like, this has got to be, bold is in the brand, but we need to have like sunglasses worthy levels of colour here.
Yeah. And I think we were also doing quite a lot of market research at the time, and one of the things that we really felt was that coaches were sort of trying to be a little bit too much like each other and seeing a lot of sort of, I don't want to be in any way offensive, but relatively innocuous colours or innocuous imagery that was sort of soft, gentle, and kind of, very sort of, you could argue empathetic, but not necessarily standing out over and above each other. And, I think what we're trying to infuse in people is a sense that you can be different and that's okay, and confident, and,
Yeah, it can give you some standout. I mean, there's sort of two approaches. You can really try and stand out from the crowd, or you can try and fit in with them, and both have advantages in different contexts. For example, hot chocolate's always purple because everyone expects hot chocolate packaging to be purple. And that's an example where new hot chocolate people normally follow the trend. But then if you were to come in with something completely different, you would stand out. You just want to make sure you stand out for the right reasons.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very true. I think also, like with colour, sometimes it's just important to think about how you're going to use it. So one of my requirements was that it has to work with white on top of it. So for example, some yellows don't work with white on top, and some sort of very bright blues don't, because there's just not enough visual contrast.
And I definitely did tweak the colours to make sure they had enough contrast. And I think, I can't remember if we sort of established some rules about what we could put over colour to make sure that it remained readable, which is obviously really important.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big factor for me, because I was thinking of making, right, if I'm going to make a header for a website or I'm going to make a social post, I want to be able to use this colour as the background. But I don't want to lose white text over it, because I don't always want to use black text over it. So we but essentially that was all of the brief I gave you, wasn't it? It was just like, there you go, that's the requirement. Now you can have fun with the palette.
Yes, exactly, because I definitely remember sort of tweaking the yellow to make sure there's some other colours in there to make sure that it's sort of dark enough. And we actually created this secondary palette as well, so to give you a bit more flexibility. But I'll skip back to where I was. So what I always try and do, even if it's on a very basic level, is give you some guidance about how to use the logo. So how much space to leave around it. And if there's, if you've got more than one version of the logo, when you should and shouldn't use it. And that just gives you a little bit of a small rule box to make sure that you're not having spent the money on having something designed, you're using it in the best way. In terms of fonts, it's always good to know the fonts in your brand and then try and use them as consistently as possible. Something to think about here is if you're using the fonts in a particular program, to make sure that they can be used. And if your designer purchases a font, you might need licenses for it. So often, and I know it was one of your requirements, was to make sure that the font was a Google font, because it's freely available and can be installed on any computer. And you can certainly brief someone for
our
that.
website loads in Google Fonts really easily. It's a couple of clicks and the font's loaded in, whereas with some of the Adobe fonts you have to install all sorts of other stuff to make the fonts work, and I was just like, it's just more work. So I wanted to keep it simple, and it's not necessarily just because I wanted to make the building of the website easier, but thinking long term, I'm like, well, if someone else starts to look after the website in a couple of years' time, I don't want them to have this knowledge of how to handle this. And I think trying to future-proof that in a way of just saying, if these fonts are really easy to get hold of and easy to use for everybody, and Google Fonts are available in Canva, Google Fonts are available in most email software and MailChimp, just out of the box. So
that's a great point. It enables so consistency, doesn't it? If it's
We're even quite geeky about the fact, or rather we're dedicated to consistency in our sort of private practice, if you like, in that, our Google Docs that we actually use between us are all set up so that they incorporate, you'll be pleased to hear, the brand fonts, because firstly, you just don't know when you might need to very quickly share something with someone externally, but also I think sort of subconsciously it makes us very, very sort of au fait, comfortable at one with our fonts, because we're using them all the time. So yeah,
definitely. What we've got next, obviously it's really important if you define colours to know exactly what they are, and I always define them in RGB for screen, CMYK for print, and hex value as well, and then that covers all of the different uses you'd need, and so that you don't have to go around sort of colour picking the colour from somewhere, or approximating it. Again, it's a point on consistency, but you'd be surprised how often people need a particular colour reference. For example, if you're having something printed, perhaps you were getting, say, a tote bag made, and the printer asks you, well, what's the reference for the colour of bag you want? And to have this all written down in one place you can come back to means that you don't have to guess or approximate or get them to convert something from the wrong colour value, or so it's just
I've had a tale of woe of this. We've had 5,000 business cards printed with a hex value rather than a CMYK value, and it was the difference between, if you look at the burgundy in the middle of that on the screen for everybody, it was grey.
Wow.
Like the print, it was so wrong, because they then put the hex value and they converted it. And so basically that was just taking a colour that they took from the website that we'd chosen to make it look good on the website. They took it and printed the business cards from it, and it was just totally wrong. So that's 5,000 business cards in the bin because we can't use them because it's the wrong colour. And it was as simple as all they needed to do was use this CMYK. So even if you're not technically minded enough to understand where these are useful, having this it just saves you so much time when you go to get a business card or a brochure or a tote bag or a mug or a banner. Imagine printing the side of a building size poster for your inaugural event that you put on after running your coaching business for 5 years, and it's the wrong red or it's the wrong green. I mean, it's just be heartbreaking, wouldn't it?
I think the CMYK thing, particularly something that as part of my process that I do, is I have a Pantone CMYK book, and I will check the values physically printed, but printed to a professional standard to make sure they look right printed, because we work in such a digital way now. All the design files I sent you were digital PDFs, and something to be aware of, things do look different on different screens, but what I do as part of my process is check that the colours I'm giving you look good printed. And rather than, like you say, getting a digital, an RGB or a hex value converted and not knowing how it'll look, I've already done that check for you. So that's sort of in the guidelines. And then I guess actually one of the things that's most fun about your brand is the 3 shapes that we developed. And we went through a few iterations of how they could be used. To start with, there was something that was integrated with the logo, but actually what we've gone for is something a bit more flexible and sort of more interesting, really. And I think this is what's really nice, is that you've got this toolkit of items that people will start to associate with your brand, even though they're incredibly simple forms, but through repetition of use, but also the fact that they're so simple and bold, I think it gives them real impact. And I remember we had sort of a sheet of shapes that I developed, and obviously they're quite simple, so some of the links sometimes can be a little bit abstract, but what's nice is the origin of them. So the 3 that we came up with, the mountain, the target, and the flower or the bloom, they all reflect parts of your business or parts of your values or parts of the journey you take people on. So they have a really nice story behind them. And but from a practical design point of view, aside from the sort of origin story, if you like, we'll have this really flexible system where we can combine them in really interesting ways. And so here, you're combining the shapes, but also that sort of wider colour palette to create something that's very unique to you. And that I know you've been using, use this a lot, say on your marketing, like on your social media, and it's becoming very recognisable. If someone scrolling through a feed, that will catch their eyes. Oh, that's those guys. They've posted again, and that's what you want, is someone to be able to pick out your posts in a feed without reading the name. And and that's what it gives you. But also, I think this is quite fun because what I've done is created a suite of pre-made textures with the shapes overlapped in different ways that you guys can reuse. So you've got this, as we said, this toolkit that you can use.
And just to remind people, as you said, Martine, you know, we've got the better, bolder and braver, which are the 3 different levels you can get to in your marketing. That these 3 different shapes speak to. But we also had a conversation with you about the fact that we had our community, we had a course that's a self-service course, as we call it, and then also a program which is a very immersive course. So, and the other thing is that we're all about inclusivity, and so the ability to have these shapes be sort of quite joyous colours that are all interacting and overlapping with each other was again something that kind of spoke to the sort of community that we're trying to build. So on many levels, having those 3 shapes was really important to us, I just wanted to say.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things you deliver kind of overlap in the areas they cover, so it kind of makes sense from that point of view. So, you know, as well as the sort of very overlapping, creating a sort of darker background, there's also a more sparse way of doing things. So you've got quite a lot of flexibility within that quite small amount of elements we've developed, but they're quite diverse in the way that you use them or can use them. And these are just different examples of the way that they can be used. And I actually, I'm looking forward to seeing more of this kind of monolithic approach, if you like. Because I think it's so simple. It be really really attracts attention in its simplicity. So I think it can be really strong. And then I just explored quickly how the shapes could be used to crop photography, possibly. And it's just good to see examples, really. And I think a good brand guidelines will not just set out a set of rules, but also give you a bit of inspiration for how a brand can be used.
And accountability, because we've been lucky enough today to have you in the nicest possible way say, guys, what's going on? What about the monolithic standalone shapes that we talked about, which you should be using a bit more? And it's like, thank you, sorry, thank you. It's like, check in.
Well, so, it's your brand. It's your brand.
No, you're absolutely right. And we get a bit, we find ourselves doing the old overlap, don't we, Simon? But you're right. Like the monolithic shapes should, I really like them too. So I wonder if it's that we haven't, we're in the middle of building the 3rd thing, and we've got all 3 things. I think we're going to be talking about all 3 things in relationship to each other, and I feel like at that point we'll probably be kind of reverting back to that monolithic kind of iconography a bit more, is what I'm imagining.
Shall I is there anything you want to go back to, or shall I close the guidelines now? What do you think?
I'm just thinking about the sentence that we had to draft, because you made us come back, and do you remember we had to
for describing the 3 shapes.
I was just going to say that was quite a nice sort of in mind of what we said earlier about sort of having a manifesto and a truth.
Yes,
we had to really wed ourselves to some words, because you said, right, we're going to have to put some words in this brand guidelines, and we were like, can you do it? And you're like, no, you can do it. And we were like, okay. And then we had to really sit down and be like, right, in like 5 words, 10 words, whatever, what are we saying? And that was useful, I found.
Yeah, I think when we were coming up with these shapes, I had ideas about what icons might represent certain things. But actually, what was great is when I came up with them, you started to read even more meaning into them, and that is what helped us select the final shapes. There was also visual things to consider, like how they work together and whether they felt like they were, although they're very different shapes, whether they felt balanced in terms of shape and density. But aside from that, what's interesting about these is they do have a bit of a backstory and a meaning, and the fact that you sort of read multiple meanings into those alongside the things that I'd thought of, I think makes it a stronger brand, because there's a reason for these things for being here. It's not just because we like circles or because we like mountains.
But also it's that ongoing relationship with meaning. We're in the business of encouraging people to repurpose content, of recycling things, of generously cheerleading each other, and also about sort of having the humility to appreciate that you may well read meaning into something in a different way at a different time.
Yes.
And we need to be warm to there being other ways of reading into things. And so to be able to do that as a practice, and then to be able to speak to it in your marketing is a joy.
Yeah, I think it is worth saying that there's no guarantee that other people outside of your organisation will read the same thing in. What we try and do is give them the best possible chance of interpreting it in the way that we hope. But there will always be, as I think I said right at the top of the podcast, actually, is the brand is really how people perceive you, and that's visually, and how you act and how you speak, and how people think about you. And you can't always control what people think about you, but you can give them the best start in the way that you act and the way that you show up visually, and hopefully nudge people in the direction of the way you'd like people to think about you. But yeah, what I like about this is, even if someone sees these shapes and they don't immediately think, a bloom symbolises growth and bravery, you've got a very strong reason for having them there, and it also gives you something to talk about. I just think that the best thing about good branding is there's a reason why every element of it is there, rather than just an arbitrary visual decision. And it gives it a lot more strength when there's a reason for choosing things.